You're here, tuned in, because you want to get a real handle on things, to understand what matters without getting bogged down in endless details, right? That's exactly what this deep dive is all about. Today, we're tackling something fundamental, something you likely do every day, taking notes.
And what's fascinating is that while it feels so, intuitive, the science behind how we learn through note-taking and reviewing is actually full of surprises. We're going to unpack what the research really tells us about making this common practice truly effective for you.
Exactly. And our guide for this exploration is a really comprehensive review of note-taking research from way back in 1989. Now, I know you might be thinking that sounds like ancient history in terms of research.
Yeah, 1989 does feel like a while ago.
But this work laid a critical foundation, identifying principles that, well, they still hold true today.
Absolutely. What's key to remember is that while our technology obviously has transformed since 1989, the core ways our brains learn and remember information haven't fundamentally changed. This review gives us a really robust framework for understanding why certain note-taking approaches work best for your learning.
So our mission today is to distill those key actionable insights from this foundational research. We want to give you, the listener, practical strategies you can use immediately, whether you're prepping for a crucial meeting, trying to grasp a new field, or just feeding that wonderful curiosity of yours. We all take notes, but the research reveals some really interesting nuances about how effective it actually is. Okay, let's unpack this.
Okay, so the research, really kicking off with work back in 1972, boils it down to two core functions of note-taking: encoding and storage. Think of these as the two main ways writing things down helps you learn and retain information.
Okay, so let's dive into the storage function first. This is the one that probably feels most obvious, right?
Yeah, I think so.
It's the idea that when you jot something down, you create a record you can revisit later, and that act of reviewing helps solidify the information in your memory.
Precisely. The theory behind this is that reviewing your notes aids a process called consolidation, where memories become more stable. It also lets you reconstruct points you might have missed, or, just combat forgetting. And the evidence for this is quite strong. A review of 24 studies showed pretty conclusively that students who reviewed notes consistently did better on tests compared to those who didn't.
Okay.
Importantly, none of those studies found reviewing notes was actually harmful.
That totally tracks. It's hard to argue with being able to look back at what was covered. Now let's talk about the encoding function. This is the idea that the very act of taking notes itself, the process of listening, deciding what's important, writing it down helps you learn, even if you never look at those notes again. That sounds a bit less straightforward.
It's more nuanced. The thinking here is that actively engaging with the material by, listening intently, deciding what to write, forces you to pay closer attention, process it more deeply, maybe organize it in your mind as you write. However, the research findings for encoding are more of a mixed bag compared to storage. Across 61 studies, 35 did show a benefit from taking notes without review, but 23 found no real difference between note-takers and just listeners. And surprisingly, 3 studies even suggested listening without taking notes led to better performance.
Interesting. So it's not a slam dunk that just writing things down always helps you learn better in the moment.
Not always, no.
When does this encoding function actually provide a benefit then?
Well, several factors seem to be at play. For instance, if the presentation is too fast or the information is incredibly dense, your brain can get overloaded just trying to keep up. That leaves fewer cognitive resources for that deeper processing needed for encoding benefits. But here's where it gets really interesting. There's this concept of generative learning in note-taking. The idea is that effective note-taking helps you build connections between the new information and what you already know.
So it's about making the new stuff stick by actively linking it to your existing understanding. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So the encoding benefit isn't just about remembering facts right then.
Exactly. Research indicated the encoding benefit might primarily show up on tests requiring you to apply the knowledge or make connections what they called far transfer tasks. Not so much on tests just asking you to recall facts verbatim, the near transfer tasks.
Okay.
Several studies supported this, showing note-takers often did better on problem solving, but not necessarily on simple factual recall.
Okay, so a key insight for you, the listener, might be, if you're aiming to truly understand concepts and apply them, the act of taking notes can be a real boost, even without review. But if your goal is just memorizing facts, maybe the encoding benefit isn't as big a deal.
That's a very useful way to frame it. Another critical aspect influencing encoding is how complete your notes are.
Ah, right.
Research consistently shows a positive correlation between the number of key ideas you manage to record and how you do on tests later. Basically, more comprehensive notes, better performance.
That also seems pretty intuitive, doesn't it? More captured means more you've actively engaged with. But here's the million-dollar question. How good are we actually at taking complete notes?
Yeah, unfortunately, the research suggests we're often not very good at it. Studies found, on average, students record less than 40% of the core ideas in a lecture.
Wow, less than 40%.
Yeah, and it's often even worse for, say, freshmen new to a subject, sometimes as little as 11%. That's a pretty significant gap.
Wow. No wonder just passively listening sometimes seems just as effective as our, well, incomplete attempts at note-taking. Okay, so storage function. Generally good through review. Encoding function.
Mm.
More nuanced, depends on the learning goal and how well you capture info. So what practical steps can you, the listener, take? Let's start by boosting that storage function, especially since our own notes often fall short.
Right. Given the limits of our own note-taking, one approach researchers explored is providing learners with complete notes for review.
Okay.
The idea is this lets you concentrate fully during the lecture without the stress of transcribing and gives you a complete record for later study.
That sounds fantastic in theory.
Yeah.
Just sit back, absorb, get perfect notes later. What's the catch?
Well, what's really interesting is that for immediate review and testing, using provided notes can actually hinder recall compared to reviewing your own notes.
Really?
It might be because you haven't personally gone through that process of selecting and phrasing the info yourself. However, when it comes to delayed exams, with maybe shorter review periods right before, studies often show no significant difference between reviewing your own versus provided notes.
So if you need it right away, your own scribbles might have an edge. But later on, provided notes can be just as good.
Not quite that simple. Research found that when the review period for provided notes was more substantial, say 30 minutes, and the notes themselves were very detailed, they could actually lead to higher achievement on delayed tests compared to reviewing your own notes.
Ah.
The completeness of the provided notes seems really crucial.
That makes perfect sense. If
Yeah.
someone else captured everything clearly and you have time to digest it, you're working with a better data set than your own possibly patchy notes.
Exactly. And Kira's own work really emphasizes this. In one study, listeners reviewing provided notes actually outperformed note takers reviewing their own notes on a delayed factual exam. The provided notes were just more comprehensive, better organized. Even more strikingly, in two separate studies, students who didn't even attend the lecture but just reviewed provided notes scored higher on delayed factual tests than those who attended, took their own notes, and reviewed them.
That's pretty mind-blowing, just reviewing good notes, beat attending and taking your own.
For delayed factual recall, yes. It really underscores the power of having a complete, well-structured resource for review. So a real aha moment for you, the listener, might be that sometimes the most effective notes for recall aren't the ones you take yourself.
That's quite something. So, for factual recall at least, access to complete, well-structured notes can be a game changer, maybe even better than our own efforts.
Precisely. The storage capability of complete provided notes seems to be a huge advantage. Now, what if you don't get instructor notes? What about borrowing notes from a classmate?
Ah, yes, the classic move. Miss a class, text a friend. Does that actually work for learning?
Turns out it can be quite beneficial. Research found students who borrowed and reviewed notes performed comparably on tests to those who took and reviewed their own.
Okay.
And interestingly, the note borrowers even outperformed note takers who didn't review on a synthesis test, a test requiring connecting ideas not explicitly linked in the lecture.
So, by borrowing, you get the storage benefit, and because you weren't busy writing during the lecture, you might have more mental space during review to make those deeper connections.
That's the suggestion. The borrowers had dedicated time during review to really think about how concepts fit together, something the original note taker might have been too busy doing while trying to capture everything live.
Right.
This suggests that generative processing making those connections might happen more during review than during the initial note-taking. So yeah, borrowing notes definitely has merit.
Okay, so whether provided or borrowed, the key seems to be getting complete, organized notes for review. But it's not just about having the info, is it? The structure of those notes probably matters too.
Absolutely. Kira and his team investigated this, comparing three formats of provided notes: a complete verbatim text transcript, a detailed hierarchical outline, and a completed matrix.
A matrix, like a table, rows and columns.
Exactly, like main topics across the top, recurring themes down the side. Then you fill in the cells. The study found both the outline and the matrix led to better recall than the plain text.
Okay.
But here's the compelling part for deeper understanding. Only the matrix notes led to better transfer performance, the ability to apply the knowledge in new situations.
That's a significant difference. Why were the outline and especially the matrix better than just text?
Well, the advantage seems to be that outlines and matrices inherently encourage you to see relationships between ideas. But the matrix takes it a step further. It helps you see both hierarchical connections within a topic and, crucially, connections across different topics based on shared themes. This cross-categorical linking leads to a more integrated understanding. For instance, the matrix helped students compare the myths of different types of creativity more effectively. That's much harder to spot in linear text or even a standard outline.
So, for remembering facts, a good outline helps. But for truly understanding how concepts relate and applying that knowledge flexibly, a matrix structure is the way to go.
That's really valuable.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about getting good notes to review, but what about the actual act of reviewing? How can you, the listener, make review sessions more effective?
That's a critical question, and surprisingly, direct research on specific review techniques is a bit limited. But we can draw insights from related research on learning from prose. That consistently shows the benefit of reviewing multiple times, spaced out, and reviewing relatively close to when you need the info, like before a test.
Okay.
And Kira found reviewing before a delayed test was significantly more effective than reviewing immediately after learning. Okay, so spaced repetition, strategic timing, those apply. But what about the actual actions during review, just passively reread?
The research suggests more active approaches are generally better. For instance, one study compared rereading notes to using them to write an integrative essay.
Oh,
Both groups had similar recall and application, but the reviewers actually outperformed the essay writers on synthesis tasks, putting ideas together in new ways.
interesting. So just writing sequentially might not be as good for making connections as actively looking for relationships during review.
That was the speculation, yeah. Writing an essay can be quite linear. Another powerful tool seems to be reorganization.
How so?
Studies found people who actively reorganized information into categories during review remembered significantly more than those who just reread or listed info. Similarly, Kara found classifying info into a matrix improved delayed recall compared to unstructured review. Although, interestingly, unstructured review was better for cued recall, like when you get a specific prompt.
So taking time to actively restructure the info, put it in your own framework, helps solidify it. But maybe unstructured review allows a broader sweep when given a specific cue.
Plausible interpretation. Then there is elaboration during review, consciously connecting lecture material to your own prior knowledge.
Right, making it personal.
Yeah. Research found that while this helps answer questions directly related to those personal connections, it didn't show a general advantage over just outlining for broader transfer or even factual recall.
So personal connections are valuable for deepening understanding in specific spots, but maybe not the most efficient general review strategy compared to something more structured like outlining. Okay, so we've covered improving the storage function. Let's circle back to encoding. How can you, the listener, become a better note taker in the first place to maximize learning during the initial recording?
Right, and it's important to remember research shows you tend to recall a higher proportion of ideas you personally record compared to ideas in provided notes.
The encoding specificity thing.
Exactly. The way you initially process and phrase it creates the best cues for you later. So improving your own note-taking quality and completeness is crucial for leveraging that encoding benefit. As we said, 3 key ways. Strive for completeness, specify internal connections as you write, and try to connect to prior knowledge, that generative note-taking idea.
So how do you actually do that in practice? How do you become a note-taking ninja?
Well, research points to several techniques. One simple but powerful method is using cues during the lecture. Research showed that signaling key points with visual cues, like colored cards, significantly improved post-test scores on that cued content.
That's fascinating. A simple visual prompt helps focus attention.
Absolutely. Another highly effective cue. When the presenter writes info on the board or a slide,
Yeah.
research indicates students record a very high percentage of what's written down. So if it's written, probably good to note it.
Makes sense.
There are also more comprehensive approaches like note-taking training programs. Some involved modeling, prompting, feedback, and showed significant increases in critical info recorded.
Training sounds great, but maybe not always accessible. What about more readily applicable techniques?
One surprisingly effective method is simply repeating or rewatching a lecture. Kira found viewing a video lecture a second or even third time led to a significant increase in the number of ideas recorded.
Just watching again helps capture more.
Yeah, and interestingly, it especially improved capturing supporting details level 2 and 3 ideas. Suggests you get the main ideas first, then flesh them out on subsequent viewings.
Okay.
They also looked at free viewing, stopping, rewinding. That led to similar amounts of notes, but took significantly longer.
So structured repetition, like watching a couple of times, seems more time efficient for getting complete notes, especially those supporting details. Now, what about actively increasing internal connections within notes as we take them?
Using skeletal outlines, those incomplete outlines you fill in, has been shown to improve exam scores compared to no structure. And Kira also compared skeletal outlines to using matrix frameworks during note-taking. Both increased the quantity of notes, but only the matrix users recalled more and did better on synthesis tests.
Again with the matrix.
Yes, it reinforces that matrix structures are particularly good at helping you see and record connections across categories as you're learning.
So, if the material fits, using a matrix template while taking notes can be a powerful way to build connections from the start. Now, let's revisit that slightly elusive generative note-taking, linking new info to prior knowledge as you learn.
Yeah, this is a fascinating area, and like we touched on, the findings are less clear-cut. The theory is note-taking should help you connect new info to old, improving far transfer.
That's right.
But when researchers actually analyzed students' notes, they didn't consistently find much explicit evidence of these connections being made during note-taking. Attempts to experimentally push generative note-taking through instructions focus on facts, concepts, integration generally had limited success in changing note content or improving performance consistently. One study even found students found it difficult to connect personal info to lecture ideas, even with dedicated pauses.
That's quite surprising. You'd think making info your own would involve linking it. So maybe trying to force that during the fast-paced lecture itself is just too demanding, while also trying to capture new info.
That's the prevailing suggestion. It might be that generative processing, making those connections, is better suited for the review stage when you have more time and less pressure.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we've explored strategies for taking better notes and reviewing them, but everyone learns differently, right? The different cognitive strengths. How do individual factors play into this?
That's a really crucial point. Research has looked at how things like working memory capacity, prior knowledge, and cognitive style influence note-taking effectiveness. Let's start with working memory, your ability to hold and manipulate info short term.
Okay.
Early research hinted higher working memory folks benefited more from note-taking, while those with lower capacity might even be hindered. More recent research found correlations. Lower working memory capacity associated with fewer words, fewer total ideas, and especially fewer subordinate ideas in notes.
So that might explain why it was detrimental for some earlier. They were overloaded.
Possibly. They might have been so focused on just capturing main points they missed the deeper processing benefits. Interestingly, one potential aid for lower working memory students is embedding questions in the lecture for them to answer in writing as they take notes.
Breaks it down. Makes sense. What about prior knowledge? How does what you already know affect things?
Well, as we touch on with generative learning, research suggested for learners with low prior knowledge, note-taking was particularly helpful for far transfer tasks applying knowledge.
Right.
But high prior knowledge students didn't get the same extra benefit, maybe because they make connections automatically. However, other research found note-takers generally did better on transfer tests regardless of prior knowledge, though both groups mostly took verbatim notes.
So it's still a bit mixed.
It seems note-taking can generally promote generative processing, especially for those with less background knowledge, maybe by encouraging them to seek connections. But there's still a gap in research on how prior knowledge interacts when notes are also reviewed later.
So if you're new to a topic, taking notes might be especially valuable for making sense of it. If you're already knowledgeable, it might not add as much for understanding connections, but still serves that storage function.
That's a reasonable interpretation. Finally, let's touch on cognitive style, specifically field independence dependence. Field-independent learners are more active restructuring info. Field-dependent learners are more bound by the presented structure.
Okay.
Research found field-dependent learners achieved less well when taking notes in a standard lecture, possibly because their notes were more verbatim, less organized hierarchically compared to field-independent learners. But crucially, This difference often disappeared on a delayed test with review time, suggesting they just needed more time to process. And providing external structure, like outlines or detailed notes, eliminated the gap, helping them encode more effectively.
So if you learn best with clear structure, ensuring that's present during note-taking through provided outlines or consciously creating one can really help level the playing field.
Okay, we've covered a lot on the traditional encoding storage functions, but understanding evolves, right? Has this model been reevaluated?
Absolutely. Kira and colleagues pointed out a methodological issue. The traditional storage group take notes review actually benefits from both encoding and storage review.
Yeah, you can't separate them that way.
Right. So they designed a new experiment. Group 1 took notes, no review, encoding only. Group 2 took notes and reviewed, encoding plus storage. And Group 3, the innovative one, was absent from the lecture but reviewed comprehensive borrowed notes, storage only.
That's clever. Isolate storage. What did they find? The results were revealing. They suggested maybe a less prominent role for encoding on its own. The primary values seemed to be storage and review. Encoding plus storage consistently beat encoding only.
Oh.
Interestingly, on the synthesis test, the storage-only group just reviewing borrowed notes sometimes even outperformed the encoding-only group.
Wow. Just reviewing beat taking notes
Mm.
without review.
Sometimes for synthesis, it again underscores the impact of having complete info and time to process it.
That's a pretty significant shift. Maybe the power isn't just the initial writing, but creating a resource for later engagement.
Exactly. In a subsequent experiment, they refined it further, giving all groups 2 acquisition opportunities. Encoding group took notes twice. Encoding plus storage viewed and reviewed once. Storage only reviewed twice, trying to equalize time.
Okay, control for time on task, and then
Encoding plus storage remains superior to encoding only on recall and recognition, but the difference wasn't as big on higher order tests. Crucially, storage only was no longer greater than encoding, only when both had 2 opportunities. This suggests the encoding function does get stronger with more processing time and repetition. It seems some benefits we thought were just storage might partly be due to the extra processing time inherent in review.
So it seems both taking notes and reviewing are valuable. And the more time you actively engage, whether encoding or reviewing, the better the learning. Okay, this has truly been a deep dive. What are the most important key takeaways for you, our listener?
Yeah, the big message is both taking notes and reviewing are crucial, but how you do each stage matters. Consciously strive for more complete notes. Seriously consider structured formats like matrices for understanding connections.
Right.
Recognize the huge value of complete organized notes your own, provided or borrowed, especially for review. And when you review, go beyond rereading. Use active techniques, reorganize, summarize, test yourself.
Fantastic, actionable advice grounded in research. Now, listener, maybe take a moment. Think about your own note-taking, your review habits. In light of this, are there strategies we discussed you might want to try? A matrix, seeking complete notes, more active review.
And here's a final thought. Given the surprising finding that just reviewing comprehensive notes, even without attending the lecture, can sometimes lead to better factual recall, what does this imply? Is learning mainly about active engagement in the moment or more about efficient processing of complete information later? Is it presence and participation or access to good info and dedicated processing time? It's definitely something worth pondering as you continue your learning journey.